Hail, Internet! It's Dave and Matt, the Dork Lords. We are here today actually talking about Wandavision. Dave, last time you were here, I actually looked it up. It was almost exactly a year ago. It was 11 months ago. We did a Marvel chat about the upcoming Black Widow movie, which is still the upcoming Black Widow movie. And so it's great to have you back. Today we're going to be chatting about your thoughts. Of course, we recapped WandaVision each episode, but this is kind of like a looking back at WandaVision as a whole and looking forward to how perhaps Wanda is going to be affecting the MCU in the future. Awesome to have you back, good sir.
Matthew, it's great to be with you, and I love what you're doing with the Dork Lords, and I'm always happy to talk nerdy about Marvel, so thank you again for having me back.
Awesome.
I've got an 11-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son, and we've been watching back through the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with the kids all through the pandemic. And so we're actually, I think tonight we're going to be watching Captain Marvel. And so we've been talking all along with the kids about kind of the way that stories work and the way that these stories work, and every once in a while we'll pause a scene and we'll be like, remember this for later, because of all the, all the different connective kind of tissue that you get in this.
So this is like your kids' first time watching these, yeah?
Absolutely. I think about 3 years ago we tried to go through the Star Wars universe, and my son particularly got very freaked out. And so, but in between trying to do Star Wars and now doing the MCU, my son has discovered Greek mythology, and in particular the Percy Jackson novels.
Okay,
and
fair enough.
Yeah, the Rick Riordan sort of set of that, and that has made him sort of more, capable's the wrong word, but more open to stories that are told like this, where there's kind of monsters and adventures and things like that. So it was really a perfect storm of opportunities to go through the MCU, because my wife and I were ready to go through it again. And you know, I'll say more about this, but from the standpoint of storytelling, it's really hard to find a set of 24 films that match the MCU in terms of storytelling. And so, you know, I like to talk to my kids about the way that stories are put together. I like to talk to them about story structure, and so the MCU gives us a good chance to do that. But also, it's just great stories, and they really like the flashy costumes, and they really laugh out loud hard at like the Ant-Man films and things like that. So they get the humor to some extent, and so all that has just been a joy.
You mentioned Ant-Man; they laugh at it. Is there a particular film that's really caught them? You know, like our character that's like, that character, let's watch that character again, or...
Yeah, so I will say my son really likes Thor, again, because of the mythology.
Mythology. I was going to guess. I bet you Thor is going to be... Okay.
And my daughter is very interested in the female characters. So, and now, I mean, we just a couple weeks ago, we watched Age of Ultron, and so now you know, Wanda has entered the MCU, and she's starting to pay attention to Wanda as well. But we're kind of talking about the way that the female characters are working. And like I say, this weekend probably, as we're filming this, we're going to get into the Captain Marvel movie. And that excites me because, again, as I've said before on the Dork Lords, I'm really interested in, for want of a better term, the kind of masculine style of storytelling and the feminine style of storytelling. And I think that there's a lot going on in Marvel that is shifting from the kind of masculine style to the feminine style, but we'll get into that as the conversation goes on.
Let's talk about Wanda. You know, I've talked a lot about Wanda through recaps. If you guys want to check that out, feel free to go check out recaps. But I have not heard your thoughts on Wanda and WandaVision, the show, Dave. So here now, give me your thoughts, good sir, on the show WandaVision.
Got a lot of thoughts, and I'm going to take 2 steps back to get to the answer to your question. We are not ever, and I'm not the first person to say this, but we're not ever going to see storytelling like we just saw from basically Iron Man up through Endgame. We're never going to see a block of films execute storytelling that well again over that kind of scope and arc. I think it's a singular achievement. I'm glad that I was alive to see it. For that being said, and I'm completely in love with the storytelling arc of the MCU that we've seen so far. But I've talked just a moment ago about how I think that there's kind of a difference between a kind of a masculinist and a feminine kind of way of telling stories.
We have a visitor to our Kittlor is interested in your conversation. Sorry to interrupt, sir.
That's all right. In masculine storytelling, there is the sense of an internal journey, the kind of hero's journey. So in addition to the quest that has to be done, you got to get the thing, there's also an internal change that has to happen. Somebody needs to realize something and shift for the movie to really work as a story. But oftentimes in more kind of masculine styles of storytelling, all of that is externalized. And so you have an external enemy, you defeat the external enemy, you've got a protagonist, and it's really that kind of Dan Harmon story circle or any of those kind of story arc things that you get, Into the Woods, all these different ways that people talk about the structure of Hollywood
Joseph Campbell.
Exactly. All kind of coming from that Joseph Campbell myth. And I think that the Marvel Universe up to this point did that really, really, really well. What astonished me about WandaVision was that it broke from that in a really original way. But let me just kind of land this answer for now by saying, okay, got done watching WandaVision, watched WandaVision again, have been thinking a lot about WandaVision, and now have started watching Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And both my wife and I have remarked to each other that Falcon and Winter Soldier feels kind of like a letdown after WandaVision, and I think in part for me it's because it's gone back to that more traditional earlier style of storytelling, where I think if we want to talk about what WandaVision's going to do for the next phase of the MCU, if it follows what I hope, it's going to open up a real break from that more structured style of storytelling into a style of storytelling where the hero and the villain sometimes are the same person. And we can get into all this, but I think that Falcon and Winter Soldier is a good show, but I think WandaVision really gave me a taste for what's possible now that this amazing set of stories has been told over these last 24 movies. I hope that they're going to say, and now we can start telling these stories in an even different, even more ambitious kind of way.
I will say one thing about Falcon and Winter Soldier that I think is pretty impactful, and it just came in, well, spoilers if you haven't watched episode 2, but bringing Isaiah Bradley into the MCU is a huge deal. This thing of like, hey, the government, did these terrible tests on people, and it was all racially biased, and there were these basically atrocities that the folks that we're going rah-rah for have committed. And so it's not a thing that you would think a typical superhero show with like, oh, Captain America, and wave the flag, and it's like, oh yeah, but actually there's some bad things happening on the side that you're rooting for. And
now,
so
Matt, let me ask you a quick question about that. Did you know about or follow the Isaiah Bradley character at all from the comics, or was your first introduction to this character in Falcon and Winter Soldier?
I knew of Isaiah Bradley. I had never read any of the Isaiah Bradley storyline.
Same with me. So I'm kind of with you. I recognize that the comics have kind of dealt with some of these questions already. I was interested and surprised to see the MCU bringing it in. I'm again excited that it's going to try and do, the possibilities now for how race can play into the storyline in Falcon and Winter Soldier have been kind of opened up by a show like Watchmen, for example,
sure, yeah.
or Lovecraft Country. And so now I'm hoping that the showrunners are saying to themselves, we're not having to necessarily blaze this trail, but now that the possibility is there, they can do some things with that story. So I agree with you. I think that that's a really interesting arc to open up.
Back to Wanda. People were theorizing like, oh, is there a season 2 coming, blah, 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 blah. I just don't see, if there's going to be a season 2, which I guess could happen, it has to jettison the TV thing, I assume, right? I mean, it was beautifully done for this season, but if you then, season 2, you're like, hey, look, it's Cheers. Or you'd be like, what? So they played it. It had its arc. It's done its thing.
Now,
If you had a season 2.
You're hearing it from me now here. So WandaVision Season 2 happens entirely in the television universe of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. How about that?
All right. Fair enough. Right. It's a show within a show within a show. Oh, my God. And it breaks reality. And
talk about headcanon. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I do feel like they told the story they wanted to tell, and that's it. And the only reason they'd come back is it was like, look, money, and we're so popular. But if they, so I think leave it the way it is. It was awesome, and they told the story they wanted to tell. And the trope of these shows really was, it was inventive. It was unlike, as you mentioned, all these other types of superhero shows we're used to. And it really played into, it wasn't just a gimmick. It wasn't just, oh, look, wouldn't it be weird if they were on the set of Family Ties? It's like, no, this is her imagining of what the perfect family is like, and she's recreated it. And so it's just, anyway, so it worked really, really well.
So I've got a question for you then, because you and I actually haven't talked about WandaVision until just now, this moment. I'm dying
Correct.
to know, who do you think was the villain in WandaVision?
Agatha has amoral designs, right? But she's not the architect. She sees, oh, look, someone's using a lot of power. I'd like that power. Let me go attempt to take it for myself. And so in that way, she's a villain. But I mean, the fact that Wanda mentally tortures thousands of people, you can't really get past that. I mean, like, it's she's got her reasons, and they're powerful reasons, but she had the choice, and she decided, you know what? I'd rather have my family with me than care about whether I'm mentally torturing thousands of people for weeks. So, yeah, she's kind of the villain of the show.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, and I would kind of take it one step lower, and I would say it's not just Wanda that is the villain, but Wanda's grief that is the villain, because Wanda's grief is what is making her... Okay, so if you're a survivor of a traumatic experience, you might recognize some of the things that are going on in WandaVision. Or if you have been in a dysfunctional family, you might recognize some of the things that are going on in WandaVision. You know, there's a real kind of maybe overuse right now of the term gaslighting. But gaslighting is when you have a situation that can be plainly seen is bad, and someone tells you that it's good, or re-narrates that for you. Okay, so that happens at interpersonal levels in families, where, you know, a child who is young enough to recognize that something is going on names it, and then all the adults around the child say, oh, no, 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 it's not that, it's this. Okay, that's kind of the classic form of gaslighting. And in that particular situation, a parent has a certain amount of power over the reality of a child, and that leaves scars that can then, you know, come into adulthood and need to be undone in therapy. But then you ask the question, what if we're not talking about a parent, but what if we're talking about someone with the powers literally of a god? And they're grieving. And what happens to reality then?
And there's that moment where Wanda talks to Monica, right at the end there, right? And she's like, hey, do you hate me?
Yeah.
Or something like that. And Monica's like, you know what? If I had your powers and I could bring my mom back, I'd probably do it.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, yeah, that same idea.
Yeah, and viewers that have seen me before know that I sort of come from a background where I teach religious studies, and I do these kinds of things. And so, you know, in the religious realm, there's a kind of relationship that's not a counseling relationship. It's not like a psychology relationship or a medical relationship. That's called spiritual direction. And so a person who, you know, comes to a spiritual director and is having a crisis like I lost my job, you know, a psychologist might ask, how does that make you feel? A medical doctor might say, well, you know, how's your heart? How's your health around this? A spiritual director really directs the person undergoing the crisis to ask the question, where is God in this for you? Where's the divine in this for you? And I've been reflecting on that because in this particular case, you know, instead of asking, where is God in this for you, for Wanda, it's really a situation where she's not looking for some external power of God in this. She is the power of God in this. And I mean, literally, she can create matter out of nothing. She can transfigure matter, like water into wine, you know, that Jesus does. She's doing to things like clothing, and bulletproof vests become, you know, the kind of 1950s wear, but still retain their qualities of being
People
bulletproof.
become clowns.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
But so when a person has that level of power, and there is no natural limit to that power, like who's going to stand up against her? Even Vision can't really stand up against her except emotionally. The only limit that she has is to get better. Like, that's the only hope. But that's what I think is going to be propelling into the MCU now. She's the big bad because she's not healed yet. She's on the way. She's recognized she's got a problem, but she's not there yet. There's still more work for her to do. And she is right now the most powerful being in the Marvel universe, at least as far as I can tell.
Sure. Well, and that brings up the post-credit scene at the end. Well, there's a mid-credit where we see the Skrulls, but then the post-credit where Wanda's in the cabin in the mountains, and she's researching the Darkhold, and she hears the voices of Wiccan and Speed crying out for help. I get the idea that they're in peril in some way. And so your point about that she's not healed, that's an interesting one, because in the moment when I saw that post-credit scene, while I was engaging, I was like, oh, I see where they might be leading into, say, the Multiverse of Madness. I thought it kind of undercut the theme of the show, which was accepting her truth, like accepting this loss, because she kind of hasn't accepted it, right? She's accepted it, but then we cut to this thing of like, oh wait, I can still get to them. Like I didn't have children, they're gone. Wait, now I can get to them again. Like, and so it almost
family is forever.
So while it kind of undercut the arc of her grieving process, it maybe in some ways it's leading, as you say, to the fact that she isn't healed, and there's more to come here because the kids are out there somewhere, or at least she assumes they are.
Well, and we've joked, and people joke that in the kind of main arc of the MCU, Tony Stark always creates the enemies that he ends up fighting. Okay, that's a very externalized version of what we're talking about. And in the kind of classic story structure, the kind of Into the Woods, Dan Harmon story circle kind of structure, that's really well recognized. Like, he's externalizing his problem, but the externalities of his inner conflict, so the resolution of the story comes not only with his defeating the bad guy that he's created, but also having grown a bit in the process. Okay, that's classic kind of storytelling, and we've seen that done really well in the MCU. What is not really delved into in those kind of story arcs is a deeper truth, and that is that hurt people, and that the villain of a story always feels like they're the hero. The parent who distorts the reality of the child thinks that they're doing it for the child's own good. Thanos kills half the universe because he thinks that's what the universe needs to be healthy and to grow. Like, this kind of pathology is there, but we haven't really dealt with it in terms of what it's like in terms of family dynamics, what it's like in terms of the kind of maternal power that now we're seeing with characters like Scarlet Witch, but also with characters like Captain Marvel, who is wound up into the Scarlet Witch mythology thanks to Monica. But the grief that Wanda has been dealing with, even though it has been vanquished in the story world of WandaVision, it's not done. It's still there.
I think this will get handled in some way in Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness. We know for a fact Wanda's in it. She is a major part, I think, of that show. That show is wrapping up, actually filming this month. But it's not going to be, the movie won't air till 2022. But I think it is a continuation of the WandaVision thing. I think where WandaVision laid some track, I think we're going to see the payoff in Multiverse of Madness. And so how that post-credit scene works into that, I don't know. I don't know if you've got thoughts on how that might transpire.
Doctor Strange, actually, my family and I just got done watching Doctor Strange recently, like within the last 2 weeks. We watched Doctor Strange in the kind of flow of the MCU that we've been doing, and so Doctor Strange is pretty fresh in my mind. Doctor Strange, for me, is a fascinating character in the MCU, and that movie is a fascinating movie, because I think that movie comes closest to the kind of internal struggle that I'm trying to articulate that I'm seeing in WandaVision, because his demons are himself. Like, the real enemy that needs to be overcome is not Dormammu in that film. Dormammu only shows up in the last 15 minutes of the film, and even though Caecilius and all that are kind of in the background doing stuff, it's really a self-overcoming, kind of what the Germans would call a Bildungsroman, a kind of story of self-overcoming for Dr. Stephen Strange. And given that Dr. Stephen Strange has been through that and has recognized, hey, I'm a jerk, and
I have to give over my ego.
I have to give over. Yeah.
I mean, that scene where he's constantly sacrificing himself
Yeah.
to Dormammu, I mean, he has to experience that pain over and over again.
That's the moment that makes Thor worthy in the first Thor film. Only Doctor Strange does it an infinite number of times.
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's a tough ask, right? I mean,
but that's recovery. Like when you are in trauma, when you're in grief, when you're in pain, when you're in addiction, and addiction is all about power and feeling like you've got control and power. When you're in that cycle, it's constantly going back and having to vanquish yourself and give yourself over to something greater than yourself. And so Doctor Strange understands that journey. Wanda has just begun that journey. That's why I think the pairing in Multiverse of Madness of Wanda and Doctor Strange is actually perfect, because he understands healing not just of the body but of the soul. Like, that's his whole gig, right? And so I hope that they're going to go in the direction of actually making this not a clash between Wanda and Strange, but rather Strange understanding that Wanda is basically a loose H-bomb, and he needs to diffuse it and help it diffuse itself.
Well, we do know another character in Multiverse of Madness is Mordo. He was the guy at the very end of that. He was like
sorcerers.
Correct. No more sorcerers. And so while I can't imagine, like, his power level is nowhere near Wanda, doesn't seem like, but he sounds like he could be an antagonistic force in this situation. So maybe what you were just saying, that you hope Stephen Strange isn't, opposed to Wanda. Perhaps it's Mordo takes that role of like, we have to stop the person who's gone crazy, whatever.
In a similar way that Sword and that Agatha were kind of catalyzers for Wanda in WandaVision. Mordo might be a catalyzer, but I really think still the villain is going to be Wanda herself. Like, Wanda is the villain. She's also the hero. Like, that's the weird storytelling that we're in now, and that's what makes it so exciting, is that it's the same thing with Superman. And forgive me for jumping universes, but the kind of prime paradox of Superman is everything that could possibly limit Superman is null and void. There is no physical limitation on Earth to Superman, with the exception of kryptonite. All of Superman's limitations have to be self-limitations. The whole point of why certain tellings of storytelling, certain versions of the storytelling of Superman really work for me and some of them don't, is that they undercut the need for Superman to learn to rein in his own power and to use his power for the good of the many. And I think that that's the journey that Wanda's on. I hope that that's the journey that Wanda is on, because that's the most interesting. That's the most interesting storyline. It's God emptying God's self in what the theologians call kenosis, or self-emptying, to become a little baby in the form of the infant Jesus, right? And then to be completely vulnerable in somebody else's arms, but also God. I mean, that's the kind of journey that makes this human and makes Wanda and Superman really interesting.
We do see, Agatha makes this prophecy, which usually those kind of prophecies in a story tend to come true, where she's like, I forgot how she put it, but you're going to bring about the apocalypse. I forgot how she phrased it, but
you don't know what you've unleashed. You've opened the door. Yeah,
or it's something about how the Scarlet Witch is. You bring chaos and destruction and whatever. The idea that there's going to be some payoff that's going to be maybe world-rending, if not world-ending, but we've already seen a version of that wasn't the negative that it was purported to be in Thor, right? Thor Ragnarok was like, oh my God, you're going to bring about the end of things, and it's spun in such a way that, yes, Thor helps bring about Ragnarok, but it's done so to save his people, actually. That the world is the people, it's not the place, and so we're going to destroy the place but save the people. So perhaps if we end up seeing some version of Wanda doing something incredibly destructive, it's spun in a way that is actually, in some ways that's a positive. I know how that comes to pass, but I feel like there's a trajectory in which it's going to seem like Wanda's on a trajectory to lead to the oblivion of things, and then assuming she's not the villain, which I don't think she'll end up being the ultimate villain, as we're saying here, but that she will find some kind of inner rectifying with herself, and whatever that oblivion ends up being is not what people think it is.
I will say, I think I agree with everything that you're saying, but I really like the rule set that Endgame put in place, and I'm going to kind of twist a little bit about what Tony Stark said to Captain America. You know, the things that happened really happened, like children being born that you love don't get erased when everything gets turned around. Like, so the stakes are real, and so even if there is this kind of defeat of the cataclysm, even if Ragnarok isn't as bad as we think, Ragnarok's still bad. The end of the world is still bad. The cataclysm still leaves a mark. It's got consequences. And I think, again, the kind of arc of the MCU we've seen so far does that really well. Like, I get emotionally wrecked and I've seen it now like 6 times, but I get emotionally wrecked when I go back to Infinity War Endgame, right? And I relive. I know everything that's going to happen. I know all the things that are going to happen. Spoiler warning, they win. But man, is there an emotional journey and a cost there. I feel the losses.
And you're so right that the MCU did the home run choice of having that 5-year gap. I'm sure somebody must have pitched, hey, they could just undo it and then everything is just fine. I'm sure somebody must have said, like, that's how you could fix this. So much better to have this situation where, and we're seeing it even in Falcon and Winter Soldier, where there's this group of people who are like, we actually liked it better during this time when there weren't all these governments. There was this loss, and the loss was real, and people remember it, and people felt it. And even though their loved ones already came back 5 years later, they still have this terrible PTSD of losing their loved ones. So yeah, the fact that they didn't just erase the problem is excellent. Yes, that's the good idea.
And so what you saw then in Endgame was, well, in the early scene in Endgame, a bunch of guys sitting around in a circle grieving. I hope, I think, and one of the Russo brothers was actually there cameoing in the scene. I really hope that the MCU is brave enough to continue that, and with WandaVision sort of setting the stage, making this not we're going to tell the same old story that we told before, but now the story is going to get even more complex, and it's going to have, and I've talked about this a lot of times before in our conversations, I really like when we move away from the me, big guy with sword, gonna knock down dragon kind of storytelling.
Punch.
Yeah, into a more feminine kind of storytelling of maybe the answer instead is to listen to the dragon. Which I'm saying this because we're also rewatching Community, and last night we watched one of the Dungeons and Dragons episodes in Community, where one character, Britta, is constantly trying to actually empathize with the other characters, even the enemy characters, and the other character, Jeff Winger, keeps ragging on her for doing that. That's literally the dynamic that I'm talking about. Like all the fanboys going, "Oh, get back to the fighting." We really need storytelling where we actually see different ways of solving the problems than simply the fighting. And we saw that with Vision, which is why Vision is such a perfect foil for Wanda in WandaVision, with the Ship of Theseus discourse. Yeah,
which is out of the comics too.
Yeah. But now I want to ask you, where do you think White Vision is now?
I know. It was frankly, I thought that was a bit too abrupt, that White Vision takes off. For one thing, the mission wasn't done at that point. He's like, I felt like, hey, I have all these memories now. I realize these stakes. So bye. Hope you handle Agatha. Whoop. I mean, I feel like by getting those memories, he is no longer a weapon of sword. I don't think that's a thing. But interestingly, notably, Wanda's in a cabin by herself.
Yeah.
Right? That seems to be in the future. Who knows how many weeks or months later. And it's not that she's in a cabin with Vision, White Vision. She's by herself. So they haven't reconnected, it seems. But yeah, I feel like there's probably an arc where they eventually come together at some point.
I've got comments about that kind of fit into this family dynamics kind of thing that I'm talking about. In recovery, particularly recovery from addiction, people who are in that system of thought will talk about the fact that when the person who is defined as the problem in the family situation starts to get better, starts to undergo healing, all the other members of the family begin reacting really negatively to the person who's been defined as the problem getting healthy. And oftentimes the initial reaction is to withdraw completely from the person who's trying to get healthy. So actually, from a kind of psychology, family dynamic standpoint, what White Vision does in that moment is actually kind of classic, because the people around you who have defined you as the problem can't handle the fact that you're no longer the problem, because now they're going to have to deal with their own problems. Vision is going off to figure out who Vision is. And Vision, all through the MCU, has been sort of deployed as this kind of empath, right? The one who can say the right thing to Wanda, who can listen to Wanda. He's the one who's there to take care of Wanda when she's confined to the compound. And so he loves Wanda, but he's also codependent on her. And he's really codependent on Wanda in WandaVision. He literally depends on Wanda for his reality. Like, that's codependency in that classic psychology talk. Wanda's starting to get healthy. Vision needs to go get himself healthy on his own, not defined by Wanda. So in terms of this different kind of storytelling that I'm talking about, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. It makes sense if we're going to think about this different kind of storytelling in the same way that we would think about kind of a Dan Harmon story circle. This is the point where the White Vision has to disappear. And I agree with you that at some point White Vision may come back, but he's going to come back having done healing of his own. And he's going to be a more integrated Vision at that point. I love this kind of storytelling. I think that it's the most ambitious kind of storytelling because it actually gets to the real stuff that we're dealing with. I mean, in a way that is really helpful. Like, the WandaVision was therapeutic. I don't just think for me, but I think for a lot of viewers. Watching someone actually go through the stages of grief who has the power to do something about it is liberating and scary.
Was there a particular episode that was more impactful than others to you in the Wanda series? Was there an age of television that worked for you nostalgically, or was it just more about the ending, the story as a whole, the way it wrapped up was satisfying, or
I'm a huge fan of the Dick Van Dyke Show, and so I did enjoy those early episodes. No, what I really liked was the ways in which they played with the expectations. In other words, so in the midst of a kind of feel-good family sitcom setting, you'll get moments where Wanda suddenly says no or rewinds things. And those things that suddenly... The thing that really grabbed me in those early episodes, there was a point where Vision glitched, and where it literally just jumped back without the rewind. You just saw it glitch back. And we literally rewound it, and we were like, did something jump? Was it? I mean, it began to freak us out, and we began to realize that the whole expectation of watching television
right,
was messing with us, and that they knew that they were messing with us. And
it's so true, that notion that it's not us just watching her life. She's controlling what we're watching.
Exactly.
And playing it out for it. Like, you start thinking through, like, all the things that she's controlling in that moment that she's providing us. It's not like there's a bunch of security cams around and we happen to pick and choose what we're watching. No. She's presenting for us. And, like, that notion is like, whoa, shoot.
The same thing that she's doing to the people in the town, she's doing to us as viewers. I mean, when my wife and I began to figure that out, we were like, this is very different than we expected it was going to be, and this is really cool. And we spent most of the series waiting for the big bad to drop. Like, who's pulling the strings behind the curtain? And when no big bad dropped, we at first were like, well, did we misunderstand Agatha, and she really was the big bad? And we were sort of pulled in that direction with that wonderful song, Agatha All Along.
Sure.
But then when we went back and watched it again, it's like, no, it really is.
This thing was in place before she arrived, and so that's
And I mean, and so in preparation for this conversation, I went online and I watched one commentary from a psychologist, and this psychologist, she played that final scene of Vision basically asking, "Who am I?" and Wanda basically saying, "You're you're my grief and you're my sadness, but mostly you're my love. And I mean, I wasn't even watching it. I was listening to it in the background, and I found myself again tearing up. And just now, I'm tearing up thinking about it, because to me, that's my favorite moment of the whole thing, is where she suddenly realizes, you're a lot of things that I need you to be, and so I literally made you into those things, and I created a reality to force you to be those things, but you're more than those things, and I have to let you go. And there's just a lot of human stuff in that. I really like that.
I think the moment for me where I suddenly thought, oh, I guess she is the villain, it's the moment where she sees what she's done. The villager, Agatha's kind of sick to the town on her. And so she's like, screw it. All right, I'm dropping it. And so she's dropping the hex. And then she realizes, oh, my kids and Vision are disappearing. And then she puts it back.
Yep.
Like, she's like, run out of here. But they don't have time to run away. We see all the townsfolk are still there. And so she makes the conscious choice. If I drop this, they disappear. Screw it. Stay. And so because up until then you think, well, maybe she didn't realize what she was doing in the time, and then it just like caught up with her, like it spiraled out of control. She's like, oh crap, how do I keep going with this? But in that moment, she knows the stakes. She knows exactly what the stakes are. If I remove the hex, I freeze people from their torment. If I keep it, I keep my kids and my husband. Fine, I'm keeping it. You're like, whoa, okay, oopsie.
People who have been through traumatic family experiences will recognize moments when their parents literally made that decision. Moments when their parents literally said, I can choose between a life-giving reality or I can choose my story, and they choose the story over the life-giving reality. So, I mean, for me, I'm right there in agreement with you, because that was a very powerful moment, because she is choosing to be, at that moment, the hero in her mind. But that's what makes her the villain.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. And we have enough of a track record from the MCU of successful storytelling choices that I feel confident they're going to handle the arc of Wanda, however that goes in the future, in a smart, well-informed way. So I feel confident. I think her story being in the hands of the MCU, I feel confident that they're going to give us some kind of a very interesting, satisfying journey for her. They've already taken her on part of it. But instead of just, for instance, forgetting about it in Multiverse of Madness, suddenly you're like, oh, if you didn't watch WandaVision, then it's fine. She's just, how do I help? Bing, bing, bing. Oh, we won. Like, no, they're not going to do that, right? There's going to be layering. There's going to be, we're informed by what we've seen, and she's on a path, and it'll be really fascinating whether she, becomes somebody that everybody is against or becomes a force that people can rally behind. However that works out, I feel like it will be a satisfying journey to see where that's going, and it's probably like a Phase 4 through line, right? I feel like this might even be an end of Phase 4 thing gets resolved through her or something.
So I agree with you completely for lots of reasons, that I feel like the storytelling is in good hands.
Before we get to Multiverse of Madness, we are going to get Spider-Man No Way Home, which we know from the castings is dealing with the multiverse. And so we might even see part of this being more informed about the multiverse before we reach the Multiverse of Madness. So in some ways, as we see Wanda's arc play out, we could see part of it displayed in No Way Home as well, leading up to whatever Multiverse of Madness brings us. I think we might have an inkling of it in the next Spider-Man film as well.
I'm excited, and I hope you and I will get a chance to talk about that too, and a lot of other of these stories, because I'm loving it.
Oh man, the Loki series.
Yeah,
I think that looks fantastic. I mean, I've only seen glimpses, but the idea behind it, again, it doesn't seem like it's everybody just go punch each other. It's an internal story of Loki, and time travel can go wrong big time in stories. But again, I feel like in this scenario, I'm looking forward to seeing how that pays off in the Loki series as well.
Another
So,
deeply complex and traumatized character. Literally
Correct.
a child of a war zone who is an immigrant who is brought in and is raised in a foreign culture and has to wrestle with who am I? And that's a traumatic process.
what did you say? Hurt people hurt? Is that what
Yeah,
you said?
hurt, the phrase in the recovery community is hurt people hurt people. So if you have been hurt, until you've actually done the internal work, your first line of defense against others that you appear to be a threat is to lash out at them with everything that you have. And so that's Loki, yeah.
That could be certainly a Loki defining characteristic.
Yeah.
But also interesting, the Loki that we're used to kind of reached a bit of an arc to at least think outside of himself. He dies attempting to take out Thanos, realizing Thanos's danger to the universe. But this Loki is not that Loki. This Loki is earlier in his progression, when he was still the jerk who was trying to dominate the Earth. So it'd be interesting to see that Loki basically go on a similar journey, perhaps, or a different journey, because he's got a different set of circumstances.
And there's so many ways that they could take that story, and I have no idea what they're going to do, but even with Loki meeting himself at some point in this time arc and realizing who he could become or who he's in danger of becoming, like there's a lot of ways that could go.
Yeah, and in fact, the rumor is that I think we will see what you're talking about. There's an alternate reality version of him that he's going to have to meet up with and whatever. So yeah. Anyway, cool stuff. Obviously, we're going to have you back, Mr. Dault, at your leisure to talk other awesome Marvel things. So as we got a lot of stuff coming, as we just recounted. So plenty of chances to have you come back and chat with us. Awesome to talk to you, good sir.
As always, it's great to see you, Matthew. Thank you. And I'm just enjoying, even though we're physically distant, I love the fact that I get to basically be a nerd with you, just like we have been doing for decades and decades. This is a highlight for me to get a chance to nerd out about really good stories with you. Thank you again.
Same here, good sir. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.